Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of WeedBudz Radio. Of course, I'm your host, Ryan Russell. I'm always so excited to learn about compliance because whether you are farming, you're in cultivation, retail, manufacturing, you have got to be compliant. And this industry can be so hard to digest the laws and regulations. And so sometimes we need to ask the professionals to come in and help. And that's what we did today. Dede Perkins, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. I'm happy to be here.
Before we jump in talking about compliance and the crazy world thereof, I'm always fascinated about the careers that the entrepreneurs and the professionals had before getting into the cannabis space, because there really is no normal journey into cannabis. Can you tell me a little bit about yours?
Certainly. I was a freelance writer working for myself, and one of my clients gave me a referral to a gentleman that all she knew was he needed help with an application. And so I went in and met him. We talked on the phone quickly, and I walk in. There's this nice guy sitting at this conference table, and he puts his hands up and he says, like, after he said hello, I don't know if you know anything about medical marijuana. I'm not a stoner, but, I really need help on this application. And I knew nothing about medical marijuana at the time, absolutely nothing, and liked the guy and, just kept listening. And before I knew it, we were working on one of the first competitive applications in Mass. We won that license. I met a lot of people at the national level and just started getting other work. And literally within like 18 months, I was totally, my practice had, flipped, and I was basically working exclusively in the cannabis industry, which I found incredibly compelling. And it was like 2013. So it was pretty early on. It was just really great to be in the industry that early.
I love that. It's funny because I've been working on adult use retail application, and I know other individuals, and it does seem like you almost need a writer on staff to fill out one of these applications. So could you have ever imagined that you'd go from freelance writing? What type of writing was it? Creative writing or?
No, I did business stuff. So, some technical, a lot of marketing copy, and
Sure.
sort of a serial entrepreneur. So before that, I had a kids clothing company for 8 years. So I knew about retail and, I ended up, sort of becoming a regulatory specialist. For whatever reason, I liked the regs, and, that was one of my jobs on many of the applications, was to make sure everything was covered and, we hadn't missed anything, and, just to be the organized, also to write it, but, to make sure that everything was covered. And just you do that over and over again in lots of different states. You start to
now, how many states have you written applications in?
Oh gosh, I don't know. 10, 11, 12 maybe.
Wow. Is there a lot of variance from state to state, or are they pretty similar?
The applications themselves in the beginning, especially, were vastly different. Maryland had this really small, character count, and actually Massachusetts did in the first one too. Others were open-ended. One of our applications that we submitted for a client was 900 pages. So, because they wanted everything, and so you want to win, right? So you put it all in there. The regulations, we saw a lot of consistency. And in fact, sometimes you'd think, okay, and I can't remember which state it was, but X state, okay, they took this from, like, literally the language would be the exact same from another state's application. So that they were all talking and grabbing pieces of each other's applications, what worked. And so
I would think that as we continue to grow as an industry, I would like to think anyway, that there will be a little bit more uniformness to the applications, because I've heard the same thing, that in Nevada and California, it could be up to 900 pages, where, in Maine, it might only be 100, or 200. So I'm thinking that as regulators get together, we might see a little bit more uniformity amongst the applications. But I'm curious, what are some ways that you recommend people in terms of tackling an application, be it, retail, farming, agriculture, just any of these applications, because there's so many licenses It's not like there's just one license. It's like you
You're
have to
right.
go get a handful. How do you recommend people tackle this?
Well, I mean, the first thing you have to do is you have to read the regulation or the statute that explains what the application looks like long before the application is actually released. So I mean, and just prepare. Honestly, I mean, you have to put a team together. I've never seen one person write an application, at least in the bigger states, by themselves. There's so many different requirements, from safety and security to extraction and cultivate, depending on what kind of license. So I think, just sort of realizing the application itself is a big project, and treating it like, manage that project and get the resources you need and plan ahead. Because if you wait until the state releases the application, you probably don't have enough time to complete it. So.
Now, let's say somebody is interested, because compliance does not stop at the application process. Compliance is ongoing for as long as you are in the business. So what tools do you have, or that you have found, make it easier for people to remain compliant after the application process?
Well, it's tricky. And I think everybody, well, from my experiences, each company does it a little differently. What we did at ProCanna is, I kept seeing, when you get a license, you think, okay, I've won, right? That's the big part. But then you got to build your facilities. You have to train your staff, hire your staff, train your staff. And, you have to comply with, in many states, everything that you promised in the application, plus the state regulations. In some cases, in California especially, there's local regulations that you have to comply with. And it's just like this soup of regulations. And then if you have a vertical operation, you've got a cultivation team that has one group of regulations, processing or retail, totally separate. The teams are totally separate. The leadership is totally separate. And if you're in multiple states, it gets to be a very complex formula. And on top of that, they change them and they enact legislation, that fine tunes the regs on a regular basis. So staying on top of that is tricky. And I just kept thinking, I saw a lot of stress in the cannabis industry, small companies, big companies, around this. Everybody was sort of, they get the license, they jump in, everything's great. And then the systems just weren't set up properly, I think, honestly. And, or there weren't systems to be set up. And, now that the industry is getting a little bit more mature, I think, compliance will become much more important. They've learned how to operate. They've got their policies and procedures in place. Even if you're a new applicant, the industry is maturing, that, you realize compliance is part of the answer. But, so ProCanna basically is a hub. We take the state regulations, we slice them and dice them. They're all searchable. We build policies and procedures and audits off of the regulations. So, we sort of think of it as table stakes. Like, these are the foundation, like the bumper, like you stay within these bumpers, you can do anything you want in the middle. Right. And that's where the internal policies come in. So, and procedures. So, our tools start with, policies and procedures, right through training and quizzing and audits, collecting business intelligence, and then reporting it out to, stakeholders. So, it's just a tool set, but it keeps everybody in there, and it's sort of a likable interface. It makes compliance just a little less stressful, I think.
I think anything to reduce stress is great. And I'm curious, in terms of compliance, what's at stake? For somebody that's gone through and invested, the amount of money that it takes to start any business, but especially in this space, what's at stake if they're not operationally excellent ongoing?
Well, there's a lot at stake. I mean, there's compliance is sort of, there's compliance with the external regulations, the state and the local municipalities. And then there's compliance with your internal policies and procedures. And not being in compliance has, effects for both. But let's just deal with the regulatory. I mean, the most obvious is fines and license suspension. In Massachusetts, a medium-sized company got a $350,000 fine for using the wrong pesticide. And, sometimes it's just, that's a lot for for any company, but especially, a small to mid-sized company. And then so there's that, there's fines, deficiencies and license suspensions and all that. but I think there's also, a company culture, the stress. If the people in the company don't know exactly what the rules are, if they don't know what's expected of them, um, it's just stress goes up, or sometimes it's just ignorance. They don't even know that they're not in compliance. And so from the owner operator point of view, that's very stressful. So, there's a lot of implications of not being in compliance.
Absolutely. I'm also curious. So you have your service of helping guide individuals, but you also have a platform. And I would love for you to kind of break down the software as well, because I know that you mentioned training and all of that, but how easy is it? Because for somebody like me, I'm not tech savvy at all. So, how does it like, and how would I fully utilize your platform?
Yep. So having a sort of a friendly and intuitive user experience was right at the top of our list as we were developing it. So, it is literally, one of our first clients who signed on, I signed him on a Friday. I called him on Monday and he's like, oh my God, I did a 30-step audit over the weekend and I'm in the facility. And so, it's pretty, we'll definitely provide training, but it's a pretty easy, intuitive process. So, you start with the policies and the procedures. You can drag and drop your own in. Again, the tools are pretty easy. It's all searchable. You can assign, a regulation block, a policy or procedure, for training. You can add videos. If you have a trimmer who does, this is the best trimmer in our staff. You can take a little short 2 or 3 minute video, connect it to a standard operating procedure, assign them both for training. Create audits, so it's just an intuitive platform that it starts with the regulations, policies, training, audit, right to reporting. And each of the sections is pretty manageable. And all the tools that we use to build out the content is available to the user. So, you use the same tools we do to build out, the content.
That's amazing. What advice do you have? And I know being compliant, being operationally excellent is something that I saw going through your website as very important things. But what advice do you have for those of us that are like right on the cusp of getting into the industry, but we're so overwhelmed? What do you have for those individuals?
Well, the cannabis industry can be overwhelming, but I think if you're writing your application, one thing that we have is all the regulations in your state for your facility type are all searchable and sliced and diced. We've got sort of those foundational policies and procedures that you can, literally they're right there for you. You can build on top of them. You can bring in your own, but ultimately at the most basic level, we've done that first layer of work for you. I think a number of people in our platform, have consultants working in ProCanna with them. So an attorney or an app writer or a cultivation consultant. So they're working in the system together to, either write the application or to set up the systems that will allow them to, be profitable and have a great company.
Now, did you ever think that you would be in software when you first got into the cannabis space?
Number one, I didn't think I'd ever be in cannabis. Number two, I never thought I'd be in software, and here I am. And it's very cool. I'm quite happy. So,
tell me about some of the challenges, because I know nothing about software. So tell me about some of the challenges you had to overcome building your platform.
The first one was actually just finding the right team. We had vetted and talked to a number of number of companies that came highly recommended, and it was 2019, I think. We were about ready to sign a contract with a really well-regarded company based in Portland, Maine. We're a Maine-based company, and it just didn't feel right. Something in the process, it just, I felt like something's not right here. And at the last, we didn't sign the contract, and I just sort of, there's just something not right. And lo and behold, literally like 3 weeks later, there was an announcement in the paper that they were moving their U.S. operations to Warsaw. And I think that was coming through in their communications. They wanted the work, but they didn't really want to tell us they were leaving the state. And we ended up starting over. So it actually put us back a couple months because it's a big investment choosing it's got to be the right fit. And we started from scratch, and we found a team that now feels like family. They are out of, New Hampshire, but they have a big team, and they are just so smart and so responsive. And I have a vision, and they create it. And, it's just a really great collaboration, and I can't say enough great about them. So. So that was
amazing.
Yeah.
Everything comes down to having a good team at the end of the day.
Certainly does. It certainly does. And systems. You need systems, but you need a good team.
Yes. So speaking of team and systems, I'm really curious because employee training is something that we're talking a lot about. How do we create the right system for onboarding? How do we create the right system for continuing education? So is this platform something that could be utilized to effectively keep our teams up to date and trained?
Most definitely. And I feel like the training is the heart of the system, right? It's all about the employees, right? So the regulations, none of that matters unless the people understand it and understand how to do their job. So, yes.
Amazing. I love it because it is. I know, like I mentioned, we're working on an adult use application here in the state of Maine. And I'm so overwhelmed reading through. I think I've read through the regulations 10, 15 times already. And what I loved about your website is it looked like I'm able to break it down into bite-sized and manageable pieces and action items and then divide that out over the team.
Exactly. Definitely. And to get back to your training, I just wanted to add one more comment. A lot of the states sort of require like responsible vendor training, like a licensed third party training company. So obviously we are not that. I just want to be clear that we are not that. So, we sort of work we complement the responsible vendor trainers or whatever they're called in the different states because we are, ProCanna allows you to train your team on your internal policies and procedures. So, it's not so much the big picture, but it's literally you can get drilled down into, like I said before, how to trim the flower or how are you going to package. And, and that's sort of in that continuing training education bucket too. So, there's if you have to have another 12 hours, every employee has to have 12 hours of continuing education. It doesn't all have to be external to your company. So internally, you could, be reassigning, the way to do their work and it changes in the regulations. So that can all be built into ProCanna.
Amazing. Because I know for us, for example, and for so many tuning in, they might have one of these kind of third party trainers that will come in and train their bud tenders. But I also have some things that I think are important, maybe on the sales training side. Now, can I make a video of myself and another employee and then upload that as a training?
Most certainly. In fact, we didn't even talk about like the forward facing piece, but absolutely. And that's all brand, right? The way people interact with your company, the way your people interact with customers. Yes, you can definitely do that.
Well, let's talk about that forward-facing piece because I know I saw strong culture, empowered employees. I know that this is something that you care about a lot.
I do. I feel like if people understand, what's expected of them, they relax. And when people relax, they're more productive. They feel good. They know how to evaluate success, right? And it's, so I think, and when people are well trained and everybody's on, it's like you're all pulling in the same direction, right? You get better results and, teams that get good results tend to have, be more resilient and more psyched about being at work, right? So, I think that all directly affects profits, brand loyalty, how does your team interact with your customers? It just, it affects everything, I think.
Tell me a little bit
even
about
future even future stakeholders or partners potentially. Like if you're a wholesaler, and you've got this great team and, they're consistent, your product is consistent, that's going to affect your supply chain, people that want to buy from you, people that are going to work with you. So it's not just with customers, but it's also with other partners in the industry. And potential investors, all that kind of stuff.
I'm sure investors look at that very strongly. I'm curious about the power of strong branding and brand development because I've heard a few times now, and it's not something I believe in, but I've heard a few people, well, we're in marijuana. If we open the doors, people are going to come and buy. And I just feel like that's not necessarily the case. Branding is important in just about any business, and I would think it is in this business as well.
I totally agree with you. And I think in the early days, when it was new, probably anybody who opened a store, if was, like I said, people would come. But as the industry and the consumers become more sophisticated, as the competition increases, right? You're talking about Maine. There's potentially a lot of licenses in Maine at a lot of retail stores, and, people are going to support the brands that they trust and they like. Like comes into it. Like, they want to like the people that they're going in and talk to. So, I think that bar is quickly being raised, honestly. And yeah.
I love that. Well, Dede, I'm so grateful that you were joining me today to talk about these things, because we don't get to talk about compliance a lot. We deal with it an awful lot. We don't get to talk about it an awful lot. And so for those out there that know they need some assistance, either breaking things down in terms of the compliance, the regulatory, getting started, or ongoing training and brand development, what is the best way for them to check out the platform or connect with you further?
Yep, I think our website does a good job of explaining what we do. That's procanna-usa.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm, happy to connect with people, answer questions, have conversations with basically anybody. It's a cool industry, and, happy to connect.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dede. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation.
And I'm so grateful to all of you for tuning into this episode of WeedBudz Radio. Be sure to check out our show notes. We will include links so you can connect with Dede on LinkedIn. Also check out the website. And of course, you can find that at weedbudsradio.com. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the next episode.